Okay, so this is a very controversial topic, as in, this may get me into trouble, and especially on the day that I'm recording this. So, I've been fighting with someone all day on Twitter. I refuse to call it X, regarding a clip that was put out by Paramount Plus. It features the character Gray in Star Trek Discovery, and it was put out in celebration of Trans Awareness Week, and that's fine and everything, but immediately there's been backlash for various reasons, and of course the typical arguments were created. You're a bigot, you're a fascist, you're a, blah blah blah. And I'm not really here for that, but there was something I brought up. For me, my problems with Star Trek Discovery, which I no longer watch, I haven't seen the ending of season 3, I haven't seen season 4, and I think this next season will be 5 or 6, and I haven't seen anything past season 3, and I don't have any intention to watch it because I feel drained by it. It's one of those things where you're watching it and you just keep thinking, they can do better. No. And it just stresses you out. I had hopes once they went into the future, 1,000 years into the future, that they'll try something differently. They didn't. The same shenanigans, the same nonsense. In the future, we met Adira and Gray, who are, I guess, a couple, a queer couple. Both are biological females, and Adira is introduced as Adira, and initially went by she, her pronouns, only to have, by the time we get to episode 7 of season 3, declare to be they, them, which I guess for Discovery, this was some sort of grand moment. And Gray is a little tricky. The actor is transgender, who goes by both they and she, so I'm not misgendering this character. The actor, if I call her she, because she does go by, the last I checked, she as well. And the character is interesting. So the character of Gray, no subtlety there, Gray, get it, not black or white, Gray, is a Trill. And the Trill of Star Trek have been incorrectly viewed as a kind of stand-in for trans people, although the species is technically binary, and which means that they're males and females, and often very much defined so. Like, Jazdia was rather androgynous, but not her replacement of Ezra Dax. And so the Trills are viewed incorrectly as non-binary, but they're not. And one of my suggestions was, if they really wanted to handle the transgender issue, why not use the Janai from the TNG episode The Outcast? And boy, that got out of control. And it quickly occurred to me that this has never been explored before, because we've been told repeatedly by those who are defenders of New Trek that Star Trek has always been woke. And I don't think that's true. I think, what they mean by woke are political ideals that are rooted in Marxist and postmodernist beliefs, which is not the same as being classically liberal. Star Trek has always been a classically liberal IP, which meant that it stood on the side of liberal values like individualism, objectivity, science, equal rights and human rights and that kind of stuff. But that's not the same as being woke. Woke is something else entirely. It means that you have a specific worldview, and that worldview is rooted in a lot of Marxist, socialist, postmodernist beliefs. But that's separate from classical liberal values and beliefs. So when this person insisted that Star Trek was woke, and of course they brought out the usual episodes of Let This Be Your Last Battlefield as a perfect example of an episode that was over the top, and while in its visual representation of race it was rather on the nose, even the plot line ultimately wasn't very woke. It basically, didn't pick a side, even though by all account one side was clearly more wrong than the other. I mean, the enslaver side was more wrong than the enslaved. And at the end, both are kicked off the ship to go carry out their death battle to the end, if you understand that episode. But really, the issue that I wanted to touch on, especially because, the retort, impassioned retort, was trans people belong in Star Trek. And yes, trans people belong in Star Trek, as do everyone else. But trans people don't belong in Star Trek because they're trans. They belong in Star Trek because they're people. But the real issue, and this is going to be very tricky, is it spawned a discussion about whether or not how Star Trek would handle transgender issues. Now, I've already mentioned The Outcast from the early 90s, 1991, and there is also The Offspring from 1990. So The Offspring is the one where Data creates a child and declared that he will let the child choose its own sex and identity and appearance, which is very liberal again. But even though many people always point to that as Star Trek being so open-minded about, allowing humans to choose their own sex, and this is very much pro-transgender, that episode was really about, man versus a machine. It's really about whether or not a machine can learn to be human. And ultimately, the daughter, Lal, failed that test because, as Picard put it, she chose to be a human female. She was overwhelmed by human emotions and crashed and burned because she couldn't handle it. And rest in peace, Lal. But really, the episode that many people point to as an episode that discusses transgender identity is The Outcast from 1992. So this is the episode where Riker develops a relationship with the member of the Genii race, who are a asexual androgynous race. And I'm calling her she, the character Soren, because she declared that she wanted to be a woman, and she was born female and wanted to be a woman and wanted to have a relationship with Riker. Ultimately, her people saw this as an affront because they thought the idea of gender was offensive and archaic. So they brought her back to the planet, where they corrected her through medicalization, and Riker was too late to save her. And so there's a lot to be said about this episode, because the issue that I really wanted to touch on is the issue of transhumanism. And I know this is going to be a hot topic, like, what do you mean transhumanism? What do you mean by that? Transhumanism is the belief that you can upgrade the human race mentally, physically, emotionally, even in many ways through the use of advanced technology, whether it's genetic engineering or cybernetics. So transhumanism is not something that is valued in the Star Trek universe. And this was the source of my argument with this person. Like, when you don't understand Star Trek does not support transhumanism and sees the use of cybernetics and genetic engineering as a bad thing. In the Star Trek universe, genetic engineering is illegal, stemming from the creation of the superhumans led by Khan Noonien Singh, who, along with his other superhumans, attempted to take over the planet during the eugenics war, to the point where they were expelled from the planet. And ever since then, genetic augments have been banned in the Star Trek universe. But while Star Trek often erred on the side of liberal values, they took a hard stance against any attempt to upgrade humans with technology. And there's a reason why the number one villains in the Star Trek universe are the Borgs, the cyborgs. This is an artificial race that literally assimilates humanoid species through the use of advanced technology. They assimilate them by suppressing their natural biology. Star Trek is very specific about what it does not support, and it's transhumanism. For the Borg, they see the cybernetic augments as an upgrade to the biological body. Star Trek doesn't see it that way. The reason Seven of Nine was rescued and her entire story arc was about getting in touch with her humanity. The reason why they frown upon genetic engineering, the reason why Dr. Bashir, Julian Bashir, his parents went to prison for secretly genetically engineering him. In Star Trek, technology serves the purpose of removing disease and disorders and illnesses, but it should not serve the purpose of artificially enhancing someone, because that is seen as a loss of humanity. So Geordi LaForge was born blind, and so he's given artificial eyes. But then you compare that to Samantha Rutherford in Star Trek Lower Decks, who has an artificial eye, not because there was anything wrong with his natural eye, but simply because he wanted to be closer to perfect as an engineer. These two, when people say the newer Trek shows don't understand Trek, this is what they try to point out. In older Star Trek shows, they would never give someone an augment simply because it has to serve a purpose. So Geordi has an artificial eyes because he was born blind. Seven of Nine still has her augments because they're life-saving to her. To remove them would be to literally kill her. So ultimately, that is the point. Star Trek sees technology as a threat to the biological. This goes back to the original series. In the original series episode, The Changeling, the machine Nomad was damaged in space by, I think, a lightning storm and came back malfunctioning. Its original purpose was to eradicate biological decay, and it came back malfunctioning and not being able to recognize biological decay from the biological period. It wiped out Lieutenant Uhura's memories because it didn't understand why she was singing. It killed Scotty because he was too highly emotional and irrational. It basically could not understand humanity and therefore had to be put down. Star Trek was very wary of machines. It was very wary of technology and the way that technology could be used to suppress people or to suppress human nature and the human condition and the human body. So to go back to the Outcast, while many people interpret this episode as an episode about, the right for transgender people to accept themselves, to be accepted for who they are, it goes a little bit deeper than that. It was a condemnation of the medicalization of natural bodies. So the character of Soren was medicalized against her wishes because her society frowned on gendered identities. They didn't believe in man and women as separate entities. They did not believe in man and women as separate entities. Instead, they believe in the androgynous way of life. According to them, they evolved into androgyny, but this didn't seem very honest because, as it was later discovered, there were many among them who were actually binary, including Soren, and that for them this was a sickness that they eradicated by medicalizing these people. Furthermore, despite their claim that they evolved to be they evolved to be androgynous, we later learned that their natural state of being was binary. So their original form, their natural form was binary, which might explain why a large portion of their population is binary, and they can only reproduce within the binary. So in order for them to reproduce, a male and a female, at least their gametes must come together in what they describe as a husk, which appears to be an in vitro machine. This is not the result of a species that would have evolved androgynously and produce. Such a species would produce asexually. It wouldn't need the equivalent of, a sperm and an egg to come together to reproduce in a machine. So the Janai people were clearly not being honest. They were suppressing their binary nature through medicalization to maintain their androgynous asexual society. And that was ultimately the critique of that. It was the use of medicalization and technology to suppress the biological. Again, there's a reason why the Borg are the number one villains, because this is what they do. They suppress the biological through technology. So Star Trek does not support this. It does not support in using technology to alter the natural state of being for the human. Technology should only be used to repair damage, to correct a disease or eradicate a disease. It should not be used for the sake of simply altering a human body to make it quote unquote perfect, because Star Trek understands that to be human is to be imperfect. So it would not support transhumanism, which transgender identity or the act of transitioning represents that, since it requires medicalization and surgery to alter the natural body. And again, this is not to say that there should be no transgender people in Star Trek, but I believe Star Trek would handle the presence of, first of all, Discovery takes place 1,000 years into the future, so they already had the technology by the 24th century to literally change one's physical body. Quark did it for fun in Deep Space Nine, so there would really be no reason for why a transgender person would have an issue being trans in the 32nd century. It wouldn't be an issue. We know it's only an issue because these TV shows are supposed to represent the current time period that they're made in, and this is an issue in today's society. And so this is why it was important for Grey to be visible as a trans person and to be, get a body that Grey could, I guess, be proud of. However, I'm not sure the way Discovery has been handling these issues. I don't think they've been very good. I don't think Trek would handle it that way. Old Trek would handle it that way. But I understand why Discovery maybe felt the need to go the path that it did. And this has always been the problem with Discovery. It is more about sending a message than actually good storytelling and good writing. And so rather than explore what it means to be transgender in even the 32nd century, it just kind of glossed over the issue for the sole purpose of sending a message about trans visibility. But what does it mean to be transgender in a world where your technology can literally just transform your body overnight? Does it have the same impact when you can just genetically engineer yourself? And again, assuming that in the 32nd century, and I'm not sure that genetic engineering of bodies is still frowned upon, at least when it comes to, you know, humans and Starfleet, assume it's frowned upon. How does that explain Grey? Yes, I know Grey is a Trill, but how does that explain Grey's Trill identity? How does that explain Grey being there as someone who's undergone a transhumanist procedure in a world where it may be illegal to genetically engineer yourself? So how does that explain? Like, to me, that would have been a more compelling story. Grey fighting for the right to transition in a world where it is illegal to genetically engineer yourself. That would have been a much better story, but that's not what we got. And you know, the frustration, this is how I think old Trek would have handled it, by exploring what it means to be transgender in a world where in the, you know, 1,000 years into the future, really Discovery should be treated. It should take place in the 25th century. It should not be taking place 1,000 years in the future, because it's very archaic for a show that takes place 1,000 years into the future. But the point I'm making is, I just wish they had gone about this in a better way. Like, the Outcast was imperfect. It was, you know, it managed to convey two separate messages at the same time. One about allowing people to be who they are, and another about the use of medicalization and technology to suppress one's natural state. And I think this was pretty good, but Discovery had so much potential. It always has so much potential, and it always had so much potential, and it never realized any of them, because it was more focused on representation and visibility than it was good storytelling about people. Anyway, that's what I have to say about this. I don't want to go on anymore, because I'm known for these rants, and I hope this wasn't too controversial. But, you know, I just wanted to point that out, that Star Trek would not support transhumanism. This is what all the Star Trek series have shown in the past. They support the right of people to be who they are, but where cybernetics and genetic engineering is involved in altering the human condition, they don't support that. But anyway, let me know what you think. I thought this was a fascinating discussion, and again, this is not to say trans people don't belong in Star Trek. Everyone belongs in Star Trek. But I just wish Discovery had gone about this issue with far more nuance and intelligence than what we got. Anyway, that's all I have. Don't forget to like and subscribe.